First of all, good afternoon to everyone. Today is my big pleasure to introduce Cristina Brito, who is going to give a lecture today in the conference CIUHCT Lectures with the communication peoples and the manatees in the early modern Atlantic, a marine environmental history approach. Cristina Brito is associate professor at the History Department at Nova in Lisbon and a researcher at CHAM, Center for the Humanities in Lisbon. She is currently the PI of the two projects, grants, bilateral funds initiatives, and the co-PI of the ERC Senior Grant for Oceans, Human History of Marine Life. So welcome, Cristina. Thank you so much for being here today. It's our pleasure to having you, and the floor is yours.
Ok, thank you so much. Boa tarde, a partir de Lisboa, a todas e a todos. It is my pleasure to be here once more, invited by CIUHCT, and to present a little bit of my work. What I'm going to show you today is the result of my kind of individual work for the past couple of years, not to say the past 10 years, but also the result of our ongoing ERC Synergy Grant, the For Oceans project. Let me just start by sharing my screen with you. Okay, there you go. Hope you can follow it. So the topic for today is people or peoples as in individuals and societies and manatees in the early modern Atlantic, an approach from the viewpoint of the marine environmental history as a domain in itself, but also in its intersections with other disciplines or other fields within the humanities. What we do in our team here is try to understand how were forged in the past the relationships between different human societies, not just Europeans, but people across the world and the rest of nature, considering that humans and environments and other animals and plants and water and sky and everything are part of an embedded system of interrelationships. And in that sense, it is an interdisciplinary project in the way that we approach it. We are working mostly from CHAM, the Center for the Humanities at Nova University. We are mostly working from the standpoint of environmental history, environmental humanities, history of science and of different types of knowledge, but we work closely with archaeologists and zooarchaeologists, people from historical climatology, economic and cultural history, historical ecology, environmentalists, artists, and so on. And together we try to answer these big questions of how humans have thought and believed and perceived and written and represented the world that we humans have lived in and live still today, of course, in this sense of a relationship between society and nature. So it is in itself also a space of interconnection that we try to approach in as much as possible in a cross-cultural way, where not just Western or Westernized ways of producing knowledge and understanding the world are considered, but also other worldviews, either local, traditional, or indigenous ways of seeing the world over the centuries. And to consider not just material, but also immaterial human productions as we do it. My focus is also in trying to make sure that non-human elements, either animals or parts of nature, can be seen or be conceived as potential active agents in the co-construction of historical narratives, so agents on their own sense. But at the same time that humans, our species, is seen as an ecological actor. So acting at the same time on the human sciences, and making sure that all actors are part of the story that we are telling, that are part of the history that we are trying to understand, but also that people, individuals, human societies, in most of the cases as top predators of the ecosystems where they are living, are seen within ecology and conservation and biology. So this entanglement that allows us to try to address these aspects as part of nature, culture, systems, or ecocultural systems. There are many ways to, at the moment, to address these entangled systems where humans and the rest of nature are seen together. So this more than human world that we try to understand in the past, and sometimes in the way that it still impacts our present days and might eventually influence our future. We do this on oceans. That's why the blue humanities, the marine environmental history, oceans and coastal seas, so the waters or the planetary water systems are our main environment, and as so are aquatic animals or marine animals. We try to integrate information from different types of historical sources, not just written, iconographic, cartographic sources, but also from material or objects or artifacts from the past. So trying to understand the materiality that has come to our days and to our hands, and also to add another layer of analysis that these days allow us to get information that sometimes complements or even changes what we have on our historical perspective of these stories. So try to do some lab analysis to get some information on species identification, on dating the objects that we have at in our collections, in our museums, and that's what you are seeing here in these pictures. We are sampling and trying to get information from very old bones and other artifacts from marine mammals from the past. Of course, disciplinary integration presents many challenges: data integration, the availability of the data, how we integrate everything, how do these different typologies of data and information can speak to one another or not in some cases, and how can we then try to build these historical narratives of changes, usually so changes that were human actions in the oceans and in the marine ecosystem. Myself, I'm an environmental history for the early modern period, so mostly for the South Atlantic. That's where I have been focusing most of the work that I've done so far. And I tend to work as I move from my own project to this very large synergistic project that I'm going to talk to you a little bit more as follows. I tend to analyze this moment, this watershed from the pre and post colonial contact in South America by Europeans. So the moment when Europeans reach extra-European land masses and oceans and peoples and cultures, and all the changes that emerged from this contact or this clash, if we will. So this idea that the world was different, it's a different world. There's a moment prior and a moment after of these kind of collisions of worldviews and spaces and ways of understanding where we are. So I tend to balance myself in between 1400 and 1800 usually. And for that I am talking about not just European expansions and its impact, but also early modern globalizations, including ecological globalization, this idea of a blue or wet globalization, as many authors have been discussing nowadays, this idea of pre-modern Anthropocene, so the idea that we can eventually push a little back in time, the moment that we can consider that humans have started impacting the world that we live in, and some people call it also early modern or early Anthropocene, and we have this work done by Annette Singh and her colleagues in a website called Feral Atlas. It's really good, and I encourage everyone to take a look at it, where they refer to these moments as eventually as an onset of the Anthropocene as a spatial and temporal detonator, or a moment of total disruption. Again, the idea that everything changed from this point on. So this is my usual temporal framework. And as I have been doing this and relying on the European sources, I have been focusing, of course, mostly on European preferences and demands and interests and motivations and tastes and so on. Try to understand the origin of these early motivations. But of course, I'm positioning myself in non-European places or spaces, either coastal or oceanic. And for that reason, I have to consider local practices, traditional and indigenous practices over time, in both sides of the Atlantic. So the western shores of Africa and usually the eastern shores of South America and also the Caribbean bases. And I try to understand, as I look at animals and how people have understood them and used them across time and space, I try to address processes of appropriation, of learning, of interaction between different societies, and how people have used and looked at these animals as resources, as symbols, and try to write or put together trends or trajectories or narratives of change in the exploitation and the understanding of aquatic resources in this geography, so the South Atlantic, so to speak. Within our team, we started working with whales and whaling as a local at start, so Iberian or European practice, and then a transatlantic activity, and that's mostly the work is being conducted now by our colleague Nina Vieira. And then when I started from whales, I moved to other marine megafauna. So we tend to focus on marine mammals. They are conspicuous animals, not just because they are big, but also because probably because of that, and also because they were good resources for people. They tend to be present in sources, and we can analyze them and find them and try to understand them. So when I moved from whales, I started to work with manatees, the sea cows of the Atlantic, which provide a very good case study for all these ways of understanding the South Atlantic in the early modern age, which is the engagement of different societies in different parts of the Atlantic. And also it provides information for how people prior or in the moment just prior to the contact with Europeans have used and understood these animals, both in Africa and South America. What we have here is a quotation. I'll just read it out loud. Guaragua, the local Tupi name for the manatee or peixe boi in Brazilian, is like a sea pig as in the flavor as it is in its genital parts. The females give birth to young such as other animals, and by other animals they mean terrestrial animals. They have a hole above the nose from where they breathe and from where water is thrown to the air. So first descriptions for these large fish, as they were called or described, nevertheless includes them in this group of what then became sea mammals, because their reproduction and their breeding was different from those of the fish. And the sources are very abundant in descriptions that provide us information about the animal, its behavior, its anatomy, its ways of living, but also in the way that the animal was providing for people, for humans. And that's, as usual, the way of addressing these animals early on for this period of time. So the manatee is excellent to nourish men. Or of all sea monsters that are good to eat and kept for provision, such as salmon and cod in Europe. The most esteemed, this is for the Caribbean, the most esteemed is a fish called lamatin and manatee. It is a monster and it grows and it looks like a cow, and she's called the sea cow. There are many descriptions about this animal. At the same time, the manatee do give us a very strong case study for comparing not just the way that different people used the marine environment and the resources, but also how knowledge and cultural realities based on nature were built for this period. And what we have here, just in comparison, this is for West Africa, the manatee, peixe-mulher, for what is now the central West Africa, named as Nguluamaza in Kikongo, the local tongue, so the animal itself, and at the same time the mamiwata, so the water spirit that is that relies on human interpretation of the environment and of the animal. So these two sides of the same animal, at the same time mundane and part of daily lives, and on the other sacred or symbolic or mythical, if you will. So we have also these two sides. And these representations that are based mostly on African water deities are still today present. So it can also provide us this large chronological framework, because they are still present today in many religious systems across the Atlantic. We find them in Central and South America, of course, and we find them still today in many local traditions and tales and folklores in Africa. We have Peixe Mama for Guinea-Bissau, Nhatia Pescabalo for Cape Verde, or Santo d'Água or Ocosso for São Tomé and Príncipe, or for Brazil, several mães de água, so water mothers, and Yaras and Iemanjás, and they are all water deities. These are all water deities based possibly in the use or the contact with these animals that I'm talking about, the sea cows. The animals, the history of the animals reach our days. So besides the time that they were used and the lives that the animals lived and intertwined with humans in the past, objects, artifacts, not just history and memories and knowledge and words, but also these objects come to our hands and to our days, and we can also work them as this concept of the afterlives of animals and objects as they enter collections of natural history or collections in museums of science and others. And we do have in Portugal not a large, but a significant number of objects and artifacts that we can use to study the past of human relationships with manatees, mostly for Brazil. They also provide us, in terms of technological development or not, they do provide us this long history of use. And what we have in these two images, I hope you can follow, is this representation here for middle 18th century, but it could be for any other period of time, of the way that the manatee was hunted with a hand harpoon that was used by a man, in this case on the boat or from the shore. And on the other side, we see the photograph of a former manatee hunter in Brazil, today a conservationist. And he is showing, again, a hand harpoon that was used to capture manatees. So the technology is exactly the same. And we can also track changes, or in this case, not changes, but how things have occurred across time in terms of the techniques employed to capture the animal. So most of what I've been saying is now published in my new book that will come out in 1 month or two in Amsterdam University Press, Humans and Aquatic Animals in Early Modern America and Africa. And it mostly draws on these aspects more of on cultural aspects of understanding the animal, a little bit in history of natural history regarding manatees, but not only, other aquatic animals, how different societies or peoples have perceived them and understood them in the context of their own worldviews and so on. A little bit of technical development, uses, preferences, and so on. So this is the work that I was doing for, I don't know, 5-6 years up to the present day. And it led me also not just to the project, but also to another way of understanding these animals that can also provide information that's important in other scientific domains. So this brings us to 4 oceans. The ERC Synergy Grant for Oceans, called the Human History of Marine Life, strongly relies on a quantitative way of doing history of the oceans. So we are moving, myself and the team that works with me here in Lisbon, we are kind of not just moving from one to the other, but trying to add another layer of analytical analysis to our historical sources, which is to try to extract quantifiable information from the sources. And the main goal is try to determine these historical extractions from the oceans in a very global and trans-chronological way. The 4 oceans aim is to address the global use by humans of marine life in the 2000 years prior to industrialization. So it's very ambitious in terms of its scientific goals, in terms of the geographic scope, and as well of the temporal scope of the project. We are 4 PIs from 3 different institutions. The project has a total time span of 6 years, and in July we'll be reaching the end of year number 2. That's where we stand now. And we are at the moment a team of around 50 researchers from across the world, a little bit, from across the teams and across many disciplines, mostly the ones that I mentioned early on in this presentation. We are strongly focusing on archaeology and history, but there are people from very different areas, including the natural sciences. So besides ourselves, we have the animals that we study and the ecosystems that they live in. So the focus is on the animals and the way that people use them. So we are working with 10 taxonomic groups that were chosen because they had and still have in some cases an important history in human demand and consumption and use of marine resources. So they were or are target species for fisheries and other practices of extraction, such as sealing or whaling. And at the same time, for most of the taxa, they are today endangered species or species that have suffered strong, heavy, and continued pressures from human extraction. So they have an impact at the same time, socio-economical and cultural in human societies, and there's an impact of human activities on the populations, on the species, and on the environment. So this is us, some of us, side by side with our animals. And we do this we are arranged at the moment in 5 work packages in order to achieve this, our main goal of advancing our understanding of what was the impact, the importance, the relevance of marine resources in human history. So mining the ocean, knowing the ocean, drivers of exploitation, consumption of marine life, and then synthesis. And we will hopefully answer these three main research questions. When and where was marine exploitation of major significance to human society? How did socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental forces drive, constrain, and enable marine exploitation? And what were the consequences of this marine exploitation at the same time for social development of our societies and for the ocean? The main output of the project will be a global digital atlas where all the information will be provided. The project is structured on open science, so information will be made available as we go on from the moment that we are producing it to the moment that we are publishing it. And it can be of use or interest either for other researchers or for the society at large or for policy making or whoever is interested in this type of data. We have published a couple of papers now. These two that I'm mentioning here, they do show us, they allow us to showcase the agenda, the scientific agenda behind the project. What are the challenges for this human past agenda? They are freely online, and you can assess them and read a little bit more about the project and what we are expecting to achieve with it. So for the Lisbon team, as we call it, we are, as I mentioned, based at CHAM, the Center for Humanities. We are currently around 10 or 12 people, also across fields, across ages and stages in our career. And we are focusing mostly on not just the South Atlantic, but the global South, in the sense that we are using information and sources from produced in Portuguese, in Spanish, across time, historically for the Portuguese and the Spanish Empire, but not only. And we are trying to fill a gap of information in the global history of the oceans for these parts of the world. So the South Atlantic, the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific and the South Pacific. And we are working with large marine fauna such as whales, sea cows, seals and sea lions, sea turtles, sharks, and tuna for the moment. Some of them are what we call sister species because historically they are used or hunted in very similar ways or in the same places, and that allow us to build on the information that we already have. And this is our time. We are focusing on moments of transition, of disruption or intensification. We are focusing in different societies from small to large. We have two, what we call global hubs or cities for the early modern period, which are Lisbon and Cartagena de las Indias. And we are considering the human times of the societies, how they developed, but also non-human times and even the geological time in our understanding of this kind of global chronological questions that we are posing. Again, we started with what we were familiar with, the manatees for my case. There are 3 species of manatees in the Atlantic, the African manatee, the Caribbean manatee, and the Amazonian manatee. These are the colored here by the shorelines are their current areas of distribution, and then the Amazon. And the 3 species are considered vulnerable under IUCN Red List. For most of them, their numbers have significantly decreased over time, but mostly in the 20th century. And historical information can provide us details on the path of the aquatic populations themselves, the distribution range, and what you see here, the small dots, the small symbols, for instance, are geographic positions of occurrence of manatees in the past, from the 16th to the 20th century, that to show us that their past distribution range, for instance, in Brazil, was further south than it is currently. So we can have an idea of the past of their populations and the environment, but we can also frame these changes or what happened or human practices in historical and social cultural contexts. For the project, we are doing what we call the systematic literature review, going through all published bibliography on the topic and trying to identify information and data and quantities from this revision. And we complement that, of course, with historical sources when needed and when they add more information. We have at the moment many thousands of entries in our EndNote database that allow us to address information and try to understand what's available at the moment. And we are doing this by searching major online databases such as GSTOR, Scopus, Web of Science, and many others, where we go through all these keywords that allow us to extract published and gray literature on the topic. So this is the first step in this kind of large meta-analysis that allows us to understand what is known at the moment and what information is available, and also what the gaps are. So this is the first step. For the manatees, for instance, we have found almost 300 papers, but from these 300 papers, only 3 had quantitative information that was usable, so to speak. So this is what I have done. I took these studies, these papers that were published, and extracted quantitative information. I went back from the papers to the sources to cross-check it and to complement it when was needed. Just an example of the types of sources that we are dealing with, mostly information for quantities, extractions, exchange, imports and exports for the 19th century. And as we go back in time, as you all know, the quantitative information becomes sparse, and the details that we have they degree in quality in terms of numbers. That's what we are looking here for. But they do give us they do provide us many important information and cultural context to understand how things have changed. Then we coded the entries, the quantitative information that we have in order to allow us to exchange the information into numbers. So what we are trying to do is to effectively quantify the number of extractions of manatees. We started by wanting to do this for South America, but we ended up by doing this just for the Amazon basin and adjacent coastal waters, because there's where the information is. And if you've seen in the prior slide, for one of the studies, because the reports are there and the numbers and the statistics are available, all the 20th century is very well quantified. And as we go back in time, information is less detailed. But we were able to get some numbers and obtain this large chronology that you see here from the middle 16th century to the end of the 19th century. So complementing, going back in time, so doing a hindcast kind of back in time of the extractions of manatees, complementing the information that was already available for the 20th century. So we counted, we obtained this estimative of around 19,000 animals, manatees extracted, captured, removed from the Amazonian environment. We also calculated the biomass, so the graphs just mirror one another, but to give us an idea of the amount of biomass, again, extracted from the system. And we then compare it to information on the different across the century. And what you see here, of course, is the intensification in the 20th century. That of course explains most of the captures over time and the large impact of this hunt in the ecosystem. But if we go back in time, we realize even if the numbers are much lower, so the order of magnitude decreases significantly as we go back in time, And of course, this corresponds to also source availability and information. So we have to take that into account. And everything that we are quantifying is severely underestimated. But anyhow, what it shows us is that there's this continued practice of using and hunting and extracting these animals from the environment. That can have a long-term impact on the environment and in the population when there's this large increase in the 20th century, but it also has a very strong cultural influence on people. So the fact that people are used to this animal as a resource, it can be used as a food item, but again, also it has magical properties, medicinal properties, even today, does provide us this cultural framework to understand the use of environment, of practices, and also of knowledge production across the time. We can map this, we can map the extractions to some parts of the territory and the intensity of this extraction. So this is ongoing work. I've just put here this symbol to please do not photograph the slides or share them as they are, because we are still doing this as we speak and they are not updated and we haven't as yet published them. But I wanted to show you because it does give us a sense of the intensity and the importance of collecting long-term information to address the past of these aquatic environments. What we know today is for the Amazon manatee that it is considered vulnerable. The numbers for the current population is in between 8,000 and 30,000, so it's a very large difference. So people are not quite sure of how many Amazonian manatees are still there, but what is clear is that there is a decrease in the population. And what we are able to establish based on our quantifications and the numbers that we have is that if we account for all the period in between the 16th, sorry, not the 15th, but the 16th and the 19th century, and then the large amounts for the 20th century, there's a decrease of around 94% in the size of the population, which is absolutely huge in terms of impact on a population and on a species. So I'm talking not just on a population, but the whole species. As I mentioned, the pre-industrial captures are significantly lower, even if they are greatly underestimated, but they do show continued both local indigenous prior to European presence and then colonial or external demand for the resource, and the continued practices of consumption, of trading and associated cultural practices. And this is also very important, not just for us to understand history and how societies have changed or not over time, or how they behaved also, but also in terms of current day conservation locally. So cultural aspects are also, and historical aspects are also very important to address current day conservation issues and environmental issues. And so this is what we are doing. We are trying to provide, at the same time that we give numbers through this meta-analysis, we are trying to provide information on contexts, cultural systems, and cultural taxonomies, on production of knowledge at different levels and different ways of producing knowledge, how networks have established or developed or changed, and processes of commodification of nature at one part, and also of naturalization. This is what we are doing. So you see here the map with all the information that we have been compiling up to the moment. And that's a lot. We still have a lot to work on and digest. And there's a lot also to do in the future. So sea cows also include the dugong. So the manatees only occur in the Atlantic, and the dugong, which is a sister species, Sirenian, they occur in the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific. So we are now starting to extend our research of historical sources and of literature review into that regions of the world across time, and try to obtain this global overview of the Sirenian extractions and exploitations. So is it possible to use these animals to provide a global history? about the history of marine environment. That's what we are trying to understand. Dugongs are also endangered. There are several populations of dugongs that have just recently been considered functionally extinct, which means that the number of individuals do not allow for the population to recover. So not the species is not going extinct, but local geographically circumscribed populations are getting extirpated. But there's this total lack of historical information and control context to understand the past of the utilization of the species. And in this case, we are talking about very different cultural and social systems as we address that part of the world across time. There is information, and for the early modern period, European sources provide information about the use of the animals, but then we have to go into other types of sources and the expertise that we are building in our team, such as historical sources in Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and many other languages, and also trying to address local and indigenous ways of historically and currently using the animal. I'd like to try to put together this global historical narrative about the sea cows in the world. I'm almost finishing, I think, yeah. What we do also has impact, besides ourselves and the academia and our students and our PhD students and our researchers and our colleagues. So we hope to inform ocean management and ocean policies and conservation. And we know that insights from the past and from history and from many different cultural aspects are starting to be taken into consideration. We are at the moment within the decade of the ocean science, in between 21 and 30. And this type of projects and information and networks that we are building across the world are challenging ecological understanding. They are changing historical understanding, and allow us to work not just across disciplines in our area of work, that's what we do, to produce science and to disseminate it, but also in the way that we address other people, the society at large in different parts of the world. There are many different networks that are working on this, such as the Oceans Past Initiative, the International Panel for Ocean Sustainability. There are at the moment many different, not just European, such as the ERC projects. There are at least 4 different ERC projects that deal at large with oceans past, but also projects in other parts of the world, such as the United States and Canada, Australia, East Asia, and people are getting in touch with one another and kind of building this momentum to address these questions about the ocean's past and how history or the humanities can contribute to a science, to the science of the ocean. On our side, we are working on this manifesto for the humanities for the ocean, based on the facts, our belief and fact that societies have historically depended on and have been shaped by marine animals and marine ecosystems. And that is that our approach, that is transdisciplinary, transchronological, cross-cultural, can add many different possibilities and can provide us many different answers to most of the questions, or several of the questions that we have today, that are at the same time environmental and societal and other. And that's it. You will find my contacts. I've been talking about my own work, but for most of the days, this is not my work. This is the work of a large team of people here in Lisbon and across Europe that work with me. Well, we work with one another, so I need to acknowledge all of them. You'll find them there in the picture. And you will find what we do on Twitter and Instagram, so do follow us. And if you have any question, feel free to reach out through my email or any other of the ways that we can engage with one another. Thank you so much. Muito obrigada.
Thank you.